Hello, my name is Dr. Bassett. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Psychological Science at Lander University. I've been teaching at Lander since 2005. I have a PhD in social psychology from Georgia State. Here at Lander, I teach classes in our research methods sequence in social psychology and special topics courses in attraction and jealousy and the psychology of death and dying. The purpose of these videos for the Psych 190 classes is to give students an introduction to the different faculty members in our department, to give them an overview briefly of the different subspecialties in the field of psychology, and to offer them some guidance and instruction about how to successfully navigate through the major and find an appropriate career. First, let me start by giving you some information about my journey and the development of my interest in psychology. I showed up at Furman University in 1992 with a declared interest in psychology, having almost no understanding of what the discipline was about. I think my decision was based primarily on the popularity of the movie Silence of the Lambs, which had come out in 1991. And that's still a current phenomenon now, that with the interest in shows like CSI, we get lots of students who think, well, it'd be cool to do forensic psychology. It was my second class in psychology at Furman, which with the very appealing title, Experimental Research Methods and Statistics. And whereas that course was really designed as a deterrent to scare off students who would not really be appropriate to the major, it was one in which I just fell in love with the discipline of psychology. And I still to this day love learning new things about psychology. And I hope that's for the same reason that you are watching this video with an interest in psychology major. And that's because of all the things in the universe that you could study on a college campus, from subatomic particles to single-celled organisms, to the pathways and the orbits of the planets and celestial bodies. None of those things is nearly as interesting as the study of why human beings do the things that they do. Sometimes they're beautiful, sometimes they're horrific, sometimes they're selfish, sometimes they're altruistic, but they're always captivating. And so that's one of the great reasons to be a psychology major, is because you probably share with me an intrinsic interest in wanting to learn more about why people do what they do. So if you take a Psych 101 course, which I'm assuming most of you have already had, then you learn somewhere in that course, if you were in person, I would ask you to define psychology. So I guess I'll ask you that now, and I'll pause and pretend for a moment that you're going to answer. But what you should define psychology as, if you're giving the textbook answer, is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. And so what's really exciting about that definition is it means that what people do, the way they think, how they feel and act, all those things are not enigmatic, they're not indeterminate, but they're governed by laws, causal laws that can be understood through systematic observation. So we can learn through the scientific method how, when, and why people do act and feel the way that they do. And that's terribly exciting. Let me narrow my focus a little bit now from the broad discipline of psychology to my subspecialty in the field, which is social psychology. Okay? So social psychology could then be defined as the scientific study of how people think, feel, and act, and how that's influenced by the real or imagined presence of other people. Okay? So we're still interested in the same thing the broader discipline of psychology is interested in. As a person, we can think, we can feel, and we can act. But what defines the social psychological approach to this is the knowledge that we don't exist in a vacuum. And I always tell students, think about a time you got in trouble. So I'll just let you call that example to mind. Okay? And now, were you by yourself? No, there was somebody with you probably exerting an influence on you. So all of our behaviors, emotions, thoughts are influenced by people we're interacting with, or even by the implied presence of how those people might react to what we're doing. And so a fundamental principle of social psychology is that human behavior mental processes represents a complex interaction between forces inside the person. That is their character, their personality, what makes them unique. And those things are interacting always with powerful social, situational forces that reside outside of them, which can cause many people to behave the same way in the powerful enough situation, even though they may be different people. So if you'd like to learn more about social psychology, some interesting web resources for you are the Society for Personality and Social Psychology, which you can visit at spsp.org, or Scott Plouse runs a nice site called Social Psychology Network that you can go to at socialpsychology.org. And those have a variety of resources that you could peruse. You can also, if you want to know sort of what's cutting edge science in social psychology, some of the premier peer-reviewed journals that you could use the internet, either something like Google Scholar or use the Jackson Library databases to search for articles in these journals. That's the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, and a Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. So those would be places where you could read about what's happening in social psychology. If you're sitting there thinking, well, I'm not interested in that, that doesn't sound like something I'll probably do, you probably are very interested in social psychology, and you probably already spend a lot of your time asking the same kind of questions that social psychologists ask. So if you were to look in a social psychology textbook, the chapters would be on things like aggression, interpersonal attraction, attitudes, persuasion, group dynamics. And so if you've ever sat around wondering, why did a celebrity couple break up? What caused this person to erupt with the violence of a school shooting incident? If you've ever sat around wondering, why are the conflicts between nations, or even the conflict between parties within a nation, why are those so deep-seated and seemingly intractable? Or if you've ever just asked yourself, why did my mom, my dad, my boyfriend, my girlfriend, that teacher, why did they act towards me in that way? Then you are interested in social psychology, because all of those are fundamentally the kinds of things that social psychologists contemplate. Now I'm going to narrow the focus, if I can, a little more. So within the realm of social psychology, let me talk to you about my specific research interest. So one of the things I want to convey to you is that faculty here at Lander are not just charged with disseminating information. That's a large part of what we do. There are things we already know about behavior and mental processes, and a large part of what we're doing is transmitting that information to you. Okay? But it's not a static body of knowledge. We don't know everything there is to know about behavior and mental processes, nor are we likely to in the foreseeable future. So we're always adding new knowledge. We're always adding new information to what we know in the discipline of psychology. And the way we do that is through empirical scientific research. So all the faculty members here at Lander are not just disseminating to you what other people have learned about behavior and mental processes, but they're also engaged in generating new knowledge, in conducting empirical research that changes the body of knowledge about what we know. And one of our goals is to get students actively involved in that process as well. So you can develop not only a lifelong love of learning, but an awareness that you don't just have to absorb what other people have discerned about the topic, but you can actually participate in changing knowledge about a field. And that's a very exciting opportunity. So let me just speak to you briefly about my research interest. Okay? I like to identify myself as an experimental, existential psychologist. And so let me explain a little bit about what I mean by that. In the 1920s to the 1950s, behaviorism ruled the day. The zeitgeist of the time was very much behaviorism. And so the behaviorists studied primarily rats and pigeons, working from the assumption that because humans are just stimulus response organisms, we can learn what we need to know about people by studying rats and pigeons and generalizing those findings. Okay? Now, while I certainly profess to believe that humans share with all other animals an evolutionary legacy, and while I certainly acquiesce that the principles of operant and classical conditioning, Pavlov and Skinner, can be applied to people, I want to assert that if you're really going to understand human beings, you have to focus on what's unique about them, what separates them from other animals. And from my perspective, the main thing that makes that separation is our ability to think about deep philosophical questions, what we call existential questions. Pigeons and rats, to the best of our knowledge, don't stay up at night contemplating the nature of their existence. They don't ask, how did we get here? Where did we come from? What's the meaning of life? How ought we to live while we're here so that we can make our existence count for something in a meaningful, valuable, and enduring way? Other animals don't ask those questions. They don't have the mental apparatus. They don't have the cognitive ability of self-reflection and self-awareness and counterfactual thinking to ask those questions, but human beings do. And so, from my perspective, if we want to understand human motivations, we need to look at those questions. Now, how my approach, the approach that I embrace, differs from, say, the early existential and humanistic thinkers who were rejecting behaviorism in the 1960s, was that those thinkers embraced what we call a phenomenological method. They would study just one person in the case study method in great detail. But in an existential experimental approach, we're going to say that the experimental method, the scientific method of discerning laws based on studying large groups of people, I'm going to assert that you can apply that to these existential questions as well. Now, some of you are saying, hold on, wait a minute. Are you telling me that the science can give us answers to a question like, what is the meaning of life? Well, that's a great question, and no, it can't. So be careful to understand what I'm saying here. Okay, questions about the meaning of life and why, what should we do, ethical. Those are metaphysical questions. They're not amenable to scientific investigation. But what I'm saying is the fact that humans struggle with those questions, and the way we struggle with those questions, and how the answers we come up with influence our behavior and the way we think, act, and feel, that process can and should be studied scientifically. So what I research is how people's awareness of their own mortality influences their behavior. So my fundamental assertion is that all those other existential questions, all the questions about what life means and why or why it is not valuable, all that is tied to our awareness of the fact that we're going to die and how we deal with that. So what I do in my research is a very simple kind of experimental procedure where I prime people to think about their mortality, either by having them answer some questions on the death anxiety scale or by having them write a free response essay about, you're going to die, what kind of thoughts or emotions does that bring up in you? So I force people to sort of contemplate their mortality, or in the control condition, they'll think about some other unpleasant topic, say like taking an exam. And the interesting thing is, if you measure people's mood, how unpleasant do they find these tasks, students typically find thinking about exams much more unpleasant than they find thinking about death. But then what I do in my research is I look at what are the consequences? How do people's attitudes or behaviors change when I force them to contemplate mortality? And so some things that I've discovered is that contemplating mortality leads people to have more negative attitudes towards those who are different from them, towards culturally dissimilar others. So for example, people who thought about death became more negative in their attitudes about illegal immigrants, but only if the immigrant was from Mexico and not if they were from Canada. Another kind of avenue that I look at is how do reminders of death influence our reactions to things that remind us of our animal nature. So I've shown that thinking about death increases disgust in response to things like bodily waste processes or eating or things we share in common with other animals that tie us to the biological world. And the last sort of avenue I've explored is how reminders of death polarize group differences in attitudes. So one of the things we're seeing in American culture is the culture wars, the polarization of liberals and conservatives, and the two groups seem to get more and more desperate rather than coming together for common ground. Well, in a recent study with a collaborator at Virginia Commonwealth University, what we showed is that liberals and conservatives use different moral principles when they're evaluating what's right or wrong. But that difference is exacerbated. That is, the liberals go even more towards the liberal values and the conservatives go even more towards the conservative values when they've been primed to contemplate their mortality. So that's just a brief sort of overview of the kind of things that I do in my research. Now I'd like to change gears again, and I want to give you as budding psychology majors, as this is sort of to open your eyes about the different pathways towards careers in psychology, I want to give you some advice about how to find the career that's right for you and then how to navigate through this major to get to that career. So many of you, your parents or others have probably asked you, so you're a psychology major, what are you going to do with that? In terms of your career, how's that going to work for you? And so I'd like to address that question a little if I could. Unlike nursing and education, a bachelor's degree in psychology is not preparing you for a specific job. Nursing prepares you for a very specific job. Education prepares you for a very specific job. Psychology does not. Okay? The consequence of that is if you don't think very much at all during your time here about what kind of job you want to have, and if you don't do anything except complete the classes in your curriculum, and that's all you do, you're probably not going to be well prepared for the job market. So when you graduate, if all you did, even if you did fairly well, if all you did was complete the requisite classes for this degree, you're not in good shape for finding the kind of career you want. Now, as has long been the case, and many of you may know this and some may not, that if you want to do psychotherapy, as many people who decide to major in psychology think they want to work doing group or individual psychotherapy in a hospital or private practice setting, that's going to require a graduate degree. Okay? Now, of course, that is a specific kind of job that you're being trained for, but you're being trained for that at the graduate level. Okay? So if you want to do psychotherapy, you can do so as a licensed professional counselor, note the word counselor, with a master's degree. But if you want to be called a psychologist, licensed at a psychologist level is a doctorate degree, a PhD or PsyD degree. Okay? And as you probably have already heard or will hear many times in the future, those programs are very competitive, very difficult to get into. So the fact is that most people who major in psychology do not go on to get graduate degrees. So what do? But what can you do with an undergraduate degree in psychology? Well, one thing that you can do is you can work in a mental health setting, not necessarily as providing psychotherapy, but you can work in a setting, maybe a residential setting, where they treat special populations like the elderly, like children, like people with substance abuse problems. You could work as a social worker, a caseworker. You could work in the prison system as, say, a parole officer. Okay? So there are lots of options available in sort of a broadly defined helping mental health kind of field with a bachelor's degree. Okay? The promising, the favorable, the upside of those kinds of occupations is that you're doing sort of noble work. You're helping people, and many of our majors express that that's what they want to do. The downside of those careers that you should be aware of is because they typically happen in the context of a state agency or maybe a nonprofit organization, they're not very lucrative, and the salaries tend to be below sort of median level salaries, or the salaries you would get in the business or private sector world. Okay? That being said, psychology majors certainly can work in the business world. So you can be competitive in the business world with a major in psychology. But the caveat to that is you must do some things outside of the core curriculum. Okay? So you must take some business classes. You must get involved in internship and volunteer work in the kind of business settings that you ultimately want to be your career settings. And so that's what I'm going to charge you with. I'll give you a couple of charges. One charge I want to give you is to take ownership of your education. Don't be passive. The British philosopher John Locke said, we're tabula rasa, we're a blank slate. So don't show up here as a blank slate. Okay, here I am to study psychology. You just deposit the knowledge, and I'll swipe my debit card and pay my tuition, and then I'll leave being able to have the career I want to have. You have to take ownership of your education, and you have to decide, what career do I want? Where do I want to work? What do I want to do? And you have to find the kind of classes in terms of outside the major classes that you need. And the second charge is you need to engage. You need to engage in your education outside the classroom. Okay? What does that mean? It means get involved. It means get involved with clubs and organizations. It means do volunteer work. It means sign up for internship or study abroad programs. It means get involved in conducting research with faculty members. It means doing all of those things outside the classroom. So the good news is that there's lots of stuff you can do. There are lots of career opportunities for a person who has an undergraduate degree in psychology. Okay? But in order to make that statement true, you have to take ownership of your education, and you have to engage outside the classroom. I thank you for your attention and time, and I invite you, if you'd like to learn more or talk with me about anything that I've made, the comments that I've made in this video, feel free to contact me. And the slide there has my office phone and email. And I appreciate your attention and look forward to be happy to discuss psychology with any of you in the future. Thank you.